foundation was formed in 2003, and at the time that we started it, we very much wanted to be creating a foundation that was providing services to what we call the not-for-profit sector or charitable sector. And as we started to talk about it, we were concerned about how we were going to fund that. So in Australia, we tended to see the charitable or not-for-profit sectors not having any money, which meant if you wanted to run a foundation, you always seemed to be looking for money from somewhere else. So as part of that, we said, how are we going to do it? If we want to create a foundation and we want to provide support for leaders in community, how are we going to do that? So we felt that by creating a proprietary limited company, whereby our profits would go to a fund, a philanthropic fund for developing leaders in community, would be a really good way of doing it. So fundamentally our idea was that if we could work for the larger corporates and charge them good money, we would have a surplus that would fund our philanthropic activities. The challenge, of course, for us was to make certain that we did sufficient larger work in our corporates to fund our philanthropic. Very easy to get drawn sort of into the others. So we created a proprietary limited company, and we have a foundation where we have our profits go into, and it's an ethical investment manager, so they only invest in things that are good for the planet, and that side of it's been going really, really well. I think it's also important to understand why we actually got started. So the reason we set up Global Leadership Foundation was to raise the emotional health levels of the planet. So we were very clear on this day that when we created Global Leadership Foundation, that was both our vision and our purpose, was to raise the emotional health levels of the planet. We also talked a bit about 3 guiding principles for us, which is self-realisation, collaboration, and stewardship. So stewardship in the biggest term, as in looking after community and the planet. So quite a big notion. So another way of putting that, looking at that, is saying working on ourselves, working with others, and working on the world. And they were sort of our core components that sat there. There were a number of things that sort of led us to creating Global Leadership Foundation as well. We both attended a quantum think program, which was how do we think differently and how do we use quantum physics as a way of working in a quantum world as opposed to a mechanistic world. Now, we're not going to talk too much about that.
We're not scientists.
But having said that, when we created Global Leadership Foundation, it was to be an experiment using quantum principles, which was fascinating. It was like big learning for us, and so obviously we want to share more of some of those things as time goes on.
I think, so to give you a concept of tables of 10, one of the things that Malcolm and I often spend a lot of time talking about was we kept meeting leaders who wanted to talk about their businesses and how they were going to make them more profitable. And in fact, there are a number of organisations that offer opportunities for leaders to come together, and they sit down and they talk about their businesses and they put up all their slides, and it's all about profit and loss and revenue and customer satisfaction. And I came back to Malcolm one day and I said, you know what? They're doing a lot of talking about their business and how do we make it profitable, but they're not looking at themselves. They're actually not going, what's my impact on my business? What am I like as a leader? How might I do things differently? And as we started to talk, the other thing that one of my former bosses had been attending one of these particular get-togethers, and they would get together once a month. And he would come back and I kept saying to him, so what are you doing together as a group? And he would go, oh no, we're just here to talk about our businesses. And I'm thinking, there are 9 powerful leaders in that room who probably together have real potential to do something amazing. Not just find a project, but really think about, well, what are our networks like? How do we work together? What are the possibilities? And I couldn't believe that they weren't talking to each other about what they could do together, what was possible. So we were having this conversation, and I said to Malcolm, why don't we set up a table of 10? And this was 2006. So in 2006, we were invited by one of the very large banks in Melbourne, in Australia, to come and offer tables of 10 internally. So let's see what we can do with leaders inside. And we had a very successful 9-month journey with a group of people that the bank saw start to change, not just personally, but the way they work together. And in fact, we're coming up with amazing ideas for how they could streamline things in the bank, how they could work together more effectively, and how they could make a difference outside the bank. You'll probably know this, often what happens in big banks is about every 5 years the CEOs suddenly change. I don't know if that's what happens here, but it does in Melbourne, and suddenly cost cutting, no more leadership development or anything to do with sitting round tables having a conversation, let's get back to basics, and the program didn't continue. Interestingly enough, 10 years later, here we are, or 11 years later now. But last year, we had a couple of people from that bank say, what's happening with tables of 10? Where is it? Where can we go? And this experience for us was, maybe it's time again, to think about what it's like to come together as people who sit and work within the business sector. And some of you will go, oh no, I'm not a leader. But we know that everyone who has somebody else looking at what they're doing and following their lead is a leader in terms of our perspective. So what would it be like to bring a group of people together, not just to understand your own impact, so know more about you, but as Malcolm said, to then look at what collaboration means, what's the power and potential of the group of people in the room to not only understand each other, see what's possible together, but make a difference to the planet, to communities, to society, and to the world at large. So that's Tables of 10.